Hello, everyone. This is Milo of Milo's Mystery Box. And today I wanted to talk about my own experiences or reflections about, um, you know, getting jobs in the past that I had versus the current job I have now as a commercial real estate appraiser trainee in a family business. And looking back on everything, when I had my previous jobs, through the end of high school and throughout college to even the first like almost 2 years after I graduated school 3.5 years ago. I kind of feel like, you know, the way everyone talks about how it's much harder to get a job than it was before the COVID-19 pandemic, when a lot of these long-term layoffs are starting to occur. I feel like while there is a certain element of truth to that, and yeah, there's much more layoffs because of justification of AI more than there used to be. I think that's the next round of automation within our society, just as industrialization was, just as automation within industry was in the rise of the dot-com bubble in the 2000s and whatnot. I feel like in a lot of ways this problem has been going on longer than people realized. Because I remember when I was back in high school and I tried to apply to many commercial retail jobs around in my area, because that's really the only type of, quote unquote, unskilled labor that I feel like that you can really do, without having a high school diploma or any type of college degree. But I kind of felt like looking for one of those jobs back in high school, because I remember everyone talked about, oh, it's so easy to get one of these commercial retail jobs, like in fast food, merchandise stores, um, maybe even some lower blue collar paid positions, which be separate from commercial retail. But I kind of feel like since a lot of things started to take a turn for the worst, obviously the generations before us in the 1980s, and then more recently with the crash or recession of 2008, I kind of feel like a lot of what we see now with difficulties in trying to find jobs and a lot of the challenges that can come from that when trying to counterbalance it with school and whatnot, I feel like a lot of that kind of has to do with a lot more requirements in education and barrier to entry within a lot of jobs, both skilled and unskilled, becoming a lot more stringent as time goes on. And I know a lot of people will say, well, it's because they want you to pay money on, things like student loans if you're going for college. And there's a point to be made with that. And then for high school, it's like, well, because if you don't have a degree at all, how can you explain or display proficiency in a job? Fair enough point. But I know, at one point in time too, in this country, in our economic system, one could have easily had no education and easily gotten like an industrial job or even some lower level office clerk, secretary type jobs. But anyways, I kind of thought about this, but it wasn't until the end of high school I felt like was when it was easier for me to be able to get a job, because obviously, and I'll go into this in another video, but I'm neurologically different compared to a lot of people. I'm neurodivergent, in case if if anyone was able to tell in the past 4 videos. But essentially, I didn't get my first job until the very end of high school. My summer between my high school senior year and my first year of university at my local community college. And I might be a bit privileged in this sense. Don't get me wrong, but I had my first job essentially working as like a low level clerk, you know, at my dad's business. The one I currently work at now as an appraiser trainee. That was my first job, and I felt like in some ways that was given to me as a result of struggling to find any meaningful part-time work. Because I do believe it has become more of an expectation that even if your goal is not to remain in one of those commercial retail firms in one of their like unskilled labor positions for a long period of time, I think the expectation is, they want you to stay there for as long as possible so they can squeeze the most money out of you until they, find you disposable, that is. But I remember I did that job for a bit in the summer of, 2018. Wow, it's already been that long. But, and then all the semesters, both for my first half of college, when I was here going to school locally, and then when I went downstate um, for school, I kind of feel like it just for me it just wasn't easy to counterbalance school and work together because the degree I went for in school and how I approached education, in some ways I kind of had to approach it from an all or nothing perspective, which might kind of seem a bit abrasive, but with someone with my neurology, sometimes that's the best way to go about things. And if it wasn't for that, I may not have graduated with magna cum laude from my university. But essentially, a lot of the jobs I felt like I worked beforehand, um, unskilled labor jobs, as many would call it. I mostly worked them during the summer. I did a little bit of clerk work for my dad, and then what was it? My summer between my freshman and sophomore years of college, I worked for my county parks at my water park. That was seasonal because obviously pools and water parks are open between Memorial Day and Labor Day, especially in this um, region or half of the U.S. And looking back on some of these jobs too, even when I felt like you could get in there, and I got in that parks job pretty easily after doing a little bit of clerk work for my dad. I kind of felt like even when I got the job, I kind of felt like, yeah, it's nice to have a job. It's nice to earn a bit of money to kill some time. But at the same time, too, I kind of felt like with what was expected of us or not expected of us in a job like that, it just kind of felt more underwhelming than anything. And when I went back to that job the next summer later, between um, I'm trying to remember when I went back the next summer in between what was it in between my sophomore year from my local school before I transferred out for my junior year at the state school I went to. I tried doing that again, but honestly, after getting injured, spraining my leg, getting into some wasp poison, not from a wasp itself, but like a substance similar to Raid after spraying for wasps and hornets. Pools and water parks are notorious for having bald-faced hornet and yellow jacket colonies like that. Um, I kind of realized, you know what, enough is enough. I value my health more than anything, and a job like this, it's not really worth it just to try to work while injured as a way to, I guess, to wait it out for the rest of that summer. But then after a while, I tried working. I tried working at a sandwich shop for a bit. I realized food wasn't for me, and with how I used to be with a lot of things, where it would take me more time to understand things, understand concepts. Probably a good thing it didn't last more than a week, just because of how streamlined, how compartmentalized or commodified um, a job like that can be, similar to working, one of those assembly lines back in the day in a factory. I guess not the same thing, obviously. But after a while, it's like I was able to do DoorDash throughout the rest of that summer until I transferred schools, and I was able to do it on some of my, semester breaks, transitions between semesters, transitions between the remaining school years. But eventually, during my last school year, um, I was able to do that a little bit while doing 6 classes per semester, and that will be a story for another video. But I kind of feel like with that as a result, while doing DoorDash was fun in and of itself, for the time being, I enjoyed being able to, drive around, travel around the area, county that I live in, and any adjacent counties, both in my state and the next state over from me, and then any of the counties surrounding my school when I was down at school. Well, that was a breath of fresh air because I didn't have to be ordered around by a boss. Part of the problem is if there's not a consistent flow of of money coming in, it can kind of be underwhelming. It's like, what am I doing? I feel like I'm wasting my time. And some jurisdictions, some more rural jurisdictions, that's most certainly true with something like DoorDash compared to more populated districts within DoorDash, Uber Eats, those gig economy service jobs. But after a while, it's like as drawback I saw with that job was lack of profitability. Because a lot of it I felt like was based on when COVID policies were in place and everybody was ordering from home, and there's only so much profit you can make with that. And then when the policies got reversed in the future nationwide, that's kind of like, unless if you're working like a holiday or like a meal rush during the evening, especially on a weekend, or if it's raining or snowing on a Sunday, it's like it's nice for the little short term rush, but it's only gonna go take you so far. It's only gonna last so long. But after a while, you know, working my internship the summer after my last year of school, before I graduated, and before I got my first big boy job. Again, it's kind of like it was nice. It was laid back. Working in a local county government. Doing mapping and GIS work. Doing data analysis. But because I was only hired to do a certain set of things, it didn't take long at all for me to realize, okay, yeah, it's like this isn't going to be long term, and unless they had enough work, enough of a supply and demand for me, to work in their office like that. What's really the point? But yeah, then 2 months after graduating, I graduated back in July of 2022. I took about 2 months off as I was looking for a job. And this is, after COVID, so this is when a lot of changes in the economy started to happen. And I feel like as a result, trying to find a job in my home state or any of the three closest states around me, it just was a struggle, sending my resume into places, sometimes with a cover letter too, applying to different jobs, sometimes getting onto an interview call or like a pre-interview screening. Sometimes you felt like it went real well, but then only like a day or a few hours later, you get a rejection email. And at the time, I was still taking a lot more things in my life personally. I didn't have the greatest mental health back then, but just looking back on it now, it kind of goes to show, a lot of times we're programmed to believe that success is instant, that, money and wealth is instant. But we need to remember a lot of times people who, get to those salary bands like that or get into those nicely paid positions, a lot of times, back then you might have had to work for it more, blue collar or white collar, or even, independent, entrepreneur, small business type of thing. But now it's just kind of like you really just got to know the right people, and you got to know when it's appropriate to accept a job and to leave a job. Of course, I'm not a career expert. I'm not a recruiter, so I can't speak on the same terms that one of them can. But it just it kind of reminds me. It's like, yeah, this stuff is not meant to be easy, even if it was promised to us in university and school as being easy. But for a while, it's like a year and a half, 2 years, I had this job at a utility company about like 25 miles to the east, northeast of where I lived. And I'll tell you, If I thought the jobs I had before were crap, this job was entirely crap. Like, it wasn't even a large corporation. It was like a medium-sized company, or you could even say like a pseudo corporation. But just some of the expectations with jobs like that, where it's like you're constantly set to produce and do maintenance. Oh, it's like, can you deliver this product to me this fast? Maps or data sets this fast. Oh, but it needs to be perfect. Well, which is it? Because if you want the best quality for something, it's going to take a bit longer. If you want something done quickly, there might be a bit more of a margin of error. And I kind of felt like, you know, if a job like that, if you have to ask questions about every little thing because it's not explained super well, or because the training is so lackluster, then maybe you should rethink your strategy. Then maybe you should rethink that whole position to begin with. Especially when it's like, you all it's like, you all want to pay people a certain, salary band, a certain pay range, but you don't really want to deliver on the quality of any said benefits tied with it by reducing the quality of the benefits, the providers, reducing the pay or whatnot. But the thing that made me realize too, um, why most people, I do agree with the whole thing of why most people should job hop unless they have an opportunity to start their own business or do content creation, is you don't want to stay in one place for too long, because then they're going to underpay you, or they're going to try to take advantage of you if someone decides to go on maternity or paternity leave. That almost happened to me, and one of my friends was put in a situation similar to that without it being maternity or paternity leave, or assuming the work of the next person above you and not being paid for that. Like, you don't want any of that. Obviously not. So then after a while, I realized, you know what, and things keep getting more expensive too. Maybe it's time for me to get out of this. Maybe the career I went to school for, and maybe all these jobs that I've had really aren't as cracked up, to be what a lot of people claim. Probably not the best way of framing it, but sometimes I'm at a loss for words for how disgusted I could be at some of this stuff. But on a more positive note, now I'm at the point where I'm at now, where it's like, I worked a deal out with my dad, to start me, you know, as a data analyst in his small appraisal firm, to then eventually become more of like a full blown appraiser, like an appraiser trainee right now, eventually to get a commercial or a general license. Some people in that career field, like with brokerage, go for residential, but essentially, I kind of realized, you know what? I've got, I've got the prize right in front of me. Why don't I just take the prize while the window of opportunity is there? And that's what I did. And obviously, not everybody has those opportunities. But if you do have an opportunity like that with like your own business, or like, content creation, honestly, I would suggest going for it. And now you got people like me who are now starting, to try their luck, yeah, try their luck at content creation in addition to, working and helping run a small business. But yeah, essentially it's like, and now that I've got my trainee license, after a year essentially of working there, and then now it's like another year has passed by, and I'm going for my next level of licensing, which, balancing out with um, big workloads, can take a while. But you know what, as long as you can find what you're happy with, the thing that will keep you satisfied and make enough money in the long term, I think that's the best way to go, especially especially in our economy today. But anyways, yeah, this was a bit of a longer video, but sometimes it's good to let these things out, have longer videos of discussion. Sometimes it's better to have shorter or medium videos of discussion. Um, I'll definitely have some story time planned for various instances of weird things that happened in my jobs in the past, and other weird things that have happened like that, with school. But anyways, I hope you all enjoyed this video. I know I can yap quite a bit. I'm neurologically different. I'm neurodivergent after all, and a lot of us neurodivergents tend to yap on for a while, but you know, as long as it's like a productive conversation or a productive enough video, it's like, oh well, what's the harm? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Have a good night, and I'll see you on the next one.